Ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to attracting and retaining the best talent, or any talent for that matter, organisations are in a crisis like never before. Now, I'm going to tell you about this crisis, but don't worry, I won't just leave you all depressed and miserable about this alarming information. With a crisis comes opportunity, and I will share some of the ways that organisations can get through this crisis. There are many reports coming out this year, in 2021, about employees around the world quitting their jobs in droves. Anthony Klotz, an organisational psychologist and professor, coined the term the Great Resignation. And there are reports coming out from EY, KPMG, PwC, McKinsey, Harvard Business Review, Bloomberg, CNBC, and they are all revealing that resignations and intentions to resign are higher than ever. Microsoft, as well as Thomas International and also Catalyst, report that half of employees around the world are planning to make career changes this year. And the Catalyst Great Work-Life Divide report showed that for working parents with children under the age of 18, this is even higher, 64%. That's almost 2/3 of working parents intending, not just toying with the idea, intending to make career changes. And working parents make up a large portion of the workforce. Looking at mothers alone, according to a recent US census, 82% of women become mothers by the age of 40. Even for staff who are not yet parents, most people do become parents. And young people are acutely aware of how their career may or may not work for their future family ambitions. So this has got to be concerning for organisations. Gallup suggests that the cost of turnover is typically double an employee's salary, and at the C-suite level, this is even higher. So let's try and unpack this a little bit further. What's driving these resignations? So we know that COVID and lockdowns around the world have changed the way people view their relationship with their job. Now, the world has changed forever, and the views people formed during the pandemic about their jobs and about what is important to them in life, it's not going to revert back. So we need to embrace this change and be better going forward. And the two most prominent reasons for this Great Resignation that came out across these various reports is, number one, a desire to work flexibly, and that's in terms of both schedule and location. And number two is the employee perceptions of a lack of understanding and empathy from their managers. So today, I'm going to try and help with sharing some of this understanding of what a specific group of employees are experiencing, working mums, to help you to empathise better with their situation. And there's also probably no surprises that some of the things that actually affect working mums also ties in with driver number one, a desire to work more flexibly. Now, of note with this first driver, there's also a significant gap between what an employee desires in flexibility and what an employer believes that they are providing in terms of flexibility. There are a lot of organisations who mistakenly think that they are meeting this need of providing flexibility, but in actual fact, they're not doing nearly enough, and they are often covertly or even overtly punishing those who utilise flexible working arrangements, and so they're missing the mark and they're still losing staff. And I'm absolutely convinced that improving experiences for working mums will also improve experiences for working dads and for non-parents, for everyone. So, following my doctoral research, which focused on the social well-being and authentic leadership experiences of women in the workforce, I embarked quite unintentionally on a further research project specifically focused on working mums. And it was after speaking at several events about my PhD research that multiple women kept reaching out to me. They wanted to tell me about their experiences as working mums. And when the same thing kept being said to me over and over, I kind of couldn't help myself from putting on my research hat and making a note of what they were saying. Now, this largely informal research project, it started with conversations with 82 working mums. Now, these were mainly in the corporate sector across a wide range of organisations in New Zealand and also some in Australia. And the findings from this were split into two groups, which were actually roughly even. Mums either A, they returned to work full-time, and this meant that their children were in full-time care, and they resented the fact that they barely got to see their children during waking hours during the week, and they also resented the financial cost associated with childcare. Or, so that's A, or B, what would happen is they would organise some kind of part-time arrangement where they would work less hours to enable them more time with their children. And it was interesting when the women talked to me about how they arranged this with their managers. Interesting in that they were so similar, it was almost as if there were carbon copy managers across the country. And this is how the conversation would typically go. The mum would say, "Hey boss, I'd like to scale back my hours so I can spend more time with the kids." And the boss, well, they would either say no, or the boss would say, "Yes, yeah, sure thing, happy to support that. You know, we're a really progressive organisation, no worries at all. Just as long as you get all your work done." Just as long as you get all your work done. So then the mum's contract, it would be amended, and there would then be a corresponding reduction in her pay. But there was not, however, a corresponding reduction in her workload, her KPIs, or her responsibilities. So in order to still get all her work done, these mums often ended up working on their days off or well into the evening. Or what happened most prominently is that actually these mums became far more efficient at their jobs, completing their work in fewer hours. And the mums all spoke about how lucky they felt and expressed gratitude about being able to work in such a wonderful organisation that allowed them to do a reduced hours contract. I cannot tell you how many times I heard the word lucky. And after I kept hearing this, my rage set in. There is nothing lucky about getting a pay cut to do the same job. And I remember when I was pregnant with our first child in 2017, and I was talking to the mums in my team who were all on reduced hours contracts. They were 0.6 or 0.8 of an FTE, full-time equivalent. And all of them had their pay reduced, but they had the same size client portfolio as the rest of us full-time staff. And I remember thinking, what a crock. So when my boss asked me if I wanted to return from maternity leave as part-time or full-time, I very quickly confirmed it would be full-time. I wanted my full salary to do the same workload, thank you very much. I would just do it in hours that suited me. And so my boss trusted me, and we agreed that I would work 4 days a week so I could spend Fridays with my son. And of course I got all my work completed in the reduced hours, no dramas at all. But I was lucky because I had a great boss. There's that word again, lucky. Why did I feel lucky to be fully paid to do my full job? Now, since this original data set of 82 working mums, I have spoken with more than 400 further working parents, and this number is growing. Mostly mums, but also some dads too. To be honest, I'll speak with anyone who'll listen to me about this. And I've now spoken with people beyond just New Zealand and Australia. There are working parents from the US, UK, Singapore, Canada, and I have yet to speak with someone to provide a significantly contradictory finding to my original data set of 82 working mums. Women are either working full-time and missing their kids, or they're working part-time, but they're getting ripped off with less pay for the same outputs. And so I thought about what is the root cause of these two very disappointing outcomes. And I believe it's this. Work and school do not align. The work day is longer than the school day. So I did some more research about the construct of work, and I realised that it is hugely archaic. 9 to 5 was literally dreamed up 200 years ago around the Industrial Revolution, and it was cemented around 100 years ago in line with Henry Ford's car manufacturing era. Now, at that time, women were barely in the workforce, and men were barely in the home force. So the 9-to-5 construct is based on the assumption that workers do not have to tend to children. It assumes that workers and parents, or the primary caregiver, are different people. But the demographics of our workforce today are immensely different from the workforce of 100 years ago. Workers are responsible for workers are responsible for looking after children. So work is 9 to 5, but school is 9 till 3. And what this means is that every single working parent, and remember, most humans do become parents, for every single day, for what could quite easily span out 2 decades of their career, have to think, what the heck do I do with my kids after school? And what the heck do I do with my kids during the school holiday? The juggle is mind-blowing. So we have a 14-month-old and also a 4.5-year-old, and I have absolutely no idea how our family would function when our eldest starts school next year if we were both in regular jobs. I have no idea how millions of parents around the world are doing this. The stress experienced by the mums that I spoke with is phenomenal. So let's look at stress a little bit further. Researchers from Manchester University and also Essex University, they looked at 11 indicators of chronic stress across 6,000 women. And they found that working mothers of one child recorded 18% higher stress levels compared with working women without children. Add a second child into the mix, and it goes up to 40% higher levels of stress. Now, this research was conducted in 2019, prior to the pandemic and the lockdowns. Can you even imagine how enormous the stress levels must be now? So, these results are alarming, but let's be honest, they're not at all surprising. Not only does stress impact people's mental, emotional and physical health, which employers should care about, it also massively affects their performance at work. If organisations want the best out of their staff, they really do need to care about staff members' stress levels. Now, this is absolutely relevant to dads too, but currently the burden of juggling work and the majority of childcare is still falling largely on mums. And so this compounds the stress for mums even further. So many of the mums are completing a full-time workload, regardless of whether they're being paid accordingly, and they are doing the majority of the childcare. Now, I'm sure we all know how stressful this can be for relationships between parents. Mums are feeling resentful towards their partners for being able to experience the luxury of just having to do their full-time job during the day, while mums are trying to balance both a full workload and the majority of the child-related tasks. Now, I'm sure I'm not the only person who does this in the room, but do you ever tell your partner about some child-related task that you did during the day, and your reason for telling them has a slight agenda? So, as an example, the other morning I took our 4-year-old to a specialist appointment, and it took up the entire morning. So I told my husband, partially to, tell him what I'd done for the day. I also partially told him so I could, bring him up to speed with the needs of our son. But the honest truth is, a little bit of my motivation for telling him was that I wanted him to know that I had to fit that task into my already busy day, whereas he had the luxury of just having to do his full-time work that day. So you can see why mums are so bloody stressed. They're getting a raw deal at work, they're either working full-time and missing their kids, or they're doing a full workload as a part-timer, but they're getting paid less than their full-time colleagues. And they're also experiencing a disproportionately heavier load when it comes to the children. And the underlying cause of a lot of this boils down to the fact that the workday is longer than the school day. The societal mismatch between school being 9 to 3, or some version of that in other countries, and work being 9 to 5 is absolutely bonkers to me. How can we live in a modern society where the schedule of the adults is different to the schedule of the children. Workers and parents are the same people. They're not separate. So I thought about this and thought, well, why don't we try and move towards aligning the two by reducing the work schedule to match the school schedule without reducing salaries. Hashtag work school hours. Now this is for all staff, not just mums. In fact, if you did it just for mums and not for dads, you can see how mums would be getting a rougher deal in the household again. Reference my son's specialist appointment I just mentioned. But I'm also saying this shouldn't just be for parents, this should be for all staff. And further, my proposition of work school hours just assumes that flexibility of both location and schedule within the work school hours framework is just a given. If organisations are not already offering flexibility as standard, they're going to get left in the dust. But the work school hours schedule goes much further than simply offering flexibility. Instead of just acknowledging or even accommodating working parents, it makes a tangible step towards truly understanding and including the needs of working parents. Doing this could give organisations a genuine edge when it comes to attracting and recruiting the best talent. Refer back to the Great Resignation crisis. So let's look at the benefits. If we were to reduce the default work construct to align with the school schedule, the benefits when it comes to individuals, so mums, dads and non-parents, they're pretty obvious and self-explanatory, right? So we're thinking more time with family, more time for hobbies and personal interests, and just a general improvement in quality of life. From a societal perspective, think about children having more time with their parents and the impact that could have on the quality of our future citizens. Consider even the environmental impacts. We consume so many time-saving products because we're in such a rush. Imagine if we had more time and we could reduce this consumption. Perhaps we could walk more instead of drive because we would be less in a hurry. And let's also look at how doing this could make the workforce more inclusive and enable more people to participate. So my research focused on working mums. But what about mums who aren't working? So I spoke with a solo mum who was on a benefit. She has limited education and work experience, but she is highly motivated to get a job. And in fact, she has successfully been offered 2 minimum wage jobs this year. But she talked me through the logistics of this. In order for her to start work on time, she would need to leave home at 8 in the morning and she wouldn't get home until after 6 o'clock in the evening. Now, her income would not be anywhere near enough to cover or pay for the before and after school childcare needed. And with 2 young school children, this just isn't possible. So what this means is that this mum, she's left with no option but to decline these job offers and stay on the benefit. Now I wonder how many more people are in this situation where they are being precluded from the workforce because of the fact that there is a mismatch between the work schedule and the school schedule. Now, let's get into the business case. So it's all well and good for me to spout off why staff and wider society would benefit, but I'm realistic and I know that that in itself is not enough to motivate all organisations to move towards adopting a work school hours schedule. But this is where I get really excited. So this is not just a lovely pie in the sky idea. This is commercially smart, so bear with me. Why would an organisation do this? The first thing is productivity. So there is already a lot of anecdotal evidence and also empirical research to support that outputs can be achieved in less than 40 hours. For starters, the law of diminishing returns. It shows that workers' outputs peter out during the day. Their productivity rate is not constant throughout the entire 8 hours. We've got Parkinson's law, which says that work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion. So think back to when you did assignments. It didn't really matter if you had 1 week or 2 weeks to do the assignments, Most students just take as long as they've got to get it done. ProtoScore, which is a leader in employee visibility software, they evaluated some 100 million data points from 30,000 US-based ProtoScore users during March and April 2000. And they found that the most productive period during the workday is, wait for it, 10:30 a.m. until 3 p.m. in the afternoon. Further evidence around the productivity increase is all the mums that I interviewed in my study who were on the reduced hours contracts. They are already doing the same level of outputs in less hours. I've also interviewed a small number of case study organisations who are already operating in this work school hours manner, and they have also found that outputs are still getting done in the reduced schedule. And one of the biggest contributors to this productivity argument is the 4-day work week, which already has a lot of mainstream traction. Andrew Barnes successfully trialled and implemented this in his own organisation, Perpetual Guardian. 20% less hours, same outputs, same pay, and the results? Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Iceland has trialled this during 2015 to 2019, and it was so successful that now 80% of their workforce are now doing this. There are many other trials happening around the world for the 4-day work week, including Japan and Spain, with positive preliminary results. So the 4-day work week of 32 hours is actually pretty close to the proposal of the school day work week. Now, when we look at the school holiday part, this is not beyond reality either. So in New Zealand, we are already used to work slowing down between late December and late January. Northern Hemisphere countries have a similar lull in their summer period. Chinese New Year, another period where people just accept that there is a break in work. So the mindset of a standard break during the year, it's already ingrained in our culture. It's not that giant of a step to do this on more than one occasion during the year. Now, in addition to the productivity gains, there are many other organisational metrics that benefit. When staff have more time for themselves outside of work, and particularly if parents have more time with their children, and they don't have to worry about what am I going to do with the kids after school and what am I going to do with the kids during the holidays, staff are less stressed. They are happier, more engaged, and what this means is improved concentration, innovation, creativity, all of which leads to improved financial performance. Studies from both Oxford University and the London School of Economics, as well as reports in Forbes, Harvard Business Review and Business to Community, all find there is a direct correlation between staff happiness and firm performance. So I understand that implementing this across every single role in every single industry is not realistic. We don't want our hospitals to only operate during school hours, and we don't want to be limited to dinner dates before 3 p.m. The most obvious and kind of easy to get your head around application of this is office workers, right? And this is true. Organisations that are already operating within the 9 to 5 would probably be the easiest to transition towards a work school hours type system. But I also know of a construction firm that are already doing this, and a manufacturer. And also think about all the roles that specifically extend their business hours to accommodate the 9 to 5 office workers. Think car mechanics, beauty salons, gym classes, retail, office cleaners. If office hours were scaled back, then so too could the opening hours for many of these providers. And further, regardless of whether an organisation operates within the 9 to 5 construct or not, our entire system is based off the 9 to 5. 40 hours a week is so ingrained into our fabric and even our legislation that even shift workers and hospitality staff, their contracts are fundamentally based off the 9 to 5 construct. So if our society default work construct transitioned towards the work school hours schedule, in time, these other industries would also utilise this as their foundation. So there are clear benefits to staff, to society and organisations of moving towards a work-school hours schedule. And I get really excited about having the opportunity to help organisations to understand these benefits and then to help them implement and transition towards this. And there are 4 areas to look at to begin with. And the first step is talk with your staff. Find out if they are actually interested in working this schedule. Ask them, how might this work in our organisation? You might just be surprised by the creative ways that staff can come up with to increase productivity when they are sufficiently motivated. The second point is phasing. So I don't necessarily recommend switching to a work-school hours schedule overnight. But perhaps just try finishing early in time for school collection, say 1 or 2 days per week. See how it goes. Test, adjust, progress. Thirdly is measuring outputs. So organisations and managers, they need to get clear about the outputs they want their staff to achieve. And it's important to be able to measure these. Instead of focusing so much on paying staff for the inputs, their hours, we want to pay them for their outputs. And this inherently makes sense. When a manager feels that they need to hire a person, it's because they have a list of tasks that they want that person to achieve. So it's kind of odd that we then remunerate their hours instead of what it is that we want them to deliver. And then a fourth consideration is scheduling. So work out as a team, when do you genuinely need to be working together? Do you actually need to be together 40 hours a week? No. And our experience during the pandemic and the lockdowns have absolutely proven this. So determine the requirements for team meetings and co-working periods and only set them within the school schedule. Stop setting 4 p.m. team meetings. Ladies and gentlemen, the Great Resignation means that organisations need to care now more than ever about attracting and retaining the best talent. And I believe that reducing the organisational default schedule to align with the school schedule, work-school hours, would go a long way towards addressing the 2 drivers for this Great Resignation. So if your organisation shifted towards a work-school hours schedule, just imagine the calibre of person that you could attract to come and work for you. So my question to finish for all the CEOs, directors, business owners in the room, which of you are brave enough to give this a go? Or perhaps I should say, which of you are brave enough to just ignore this? Thank you very much.